This week on the show, we're exploring Dragonfly BSD 4.8.1. The new release is there. We also look at how the X11 clipboard works and show you a couple of good OpenBSD gaming resources for all your needs on gaming on BSD. Now. BSD Now, episode 208, Faces of Open Source, recorded for the 23rd of August 2017. I am your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have a great episode prepared for you as every other week as well. So we should get right into our headlines this week, which is over at the NetBSD blog, LLVM, Clang, and compiler RT support enhancements. So what's this all about?
Yeah, so this is a blog post by Kamil Rutowski, and he's saying, in the last month, I've started to upstream code for the sanitizers, both the common layer and UBSAN. I worked also on the elimination of unexpected failures in the Clang and LLVM test suite. I've managed to achieve, with a pile of local patches, the number of 0 unexpected bugs within LLVM, using check LLVM, and 3 unexpected bugs with Clang, using check Clang. However, those ones were caused by hard-coded environments of using lib standard C++ instead of lib C++. The number of failures in sanitizers, check sanitizers, is also low, close to 0, but not quite there yet.
Very nice.
For LLVM, it says, in order to achieve the goals of testability concerning the LLVM project, I had to prepare a package source work in progress package called LLVM All-in-One that contains 12 active LLVM projects within one single tree. The set of these projects consists of LLVM, Clang, compiler RT, libcxx, libcxx ABI, libunwind, test suite, OpenMP, LLGO, LLD, LLDB, Clang Tools Extra. These were required to build and execute the test suite in the LLVM projects. Ideally, the test should work in standalone packages, so you can test LLVM and Clang and so on, but currently you kind of need everything to make it work. However, real life is less bright than this and has forced me to use Clang for everything. So then it talks a bit about some of the internals of LLVM, saying there were 4 threads in this. First was broken call once within lib standard C++. And it's an old and well-known bug, and it usually worked around with a homegrown implementation of LLVM call once. I've discovered that the call once workaround isn't sufficient for the whole LLVM functionality. Call once can be called internally inside lib C++ libraries, like within the C++ futures interface. And so luckily they solved the bug Georg Sonnenberger did in the elfdynamic linker, solving that problem. There were also unportable shell constructs hard-coded in tests using redirect to ampersand and so on. That's now been fixed upstream. The LLVM just-in-time compiler, the LLVM memory generic allocator, or page mapper, was designed to freely map pages with any combination of protection bits, like read, write, and execute. This approach breaks on NetBSD, which uses the pax mprotect and requires redesign of the interfaces. This is a continuation of the past month of allocate RWX and release RWX compatibility within NetBSD. So he's prepared a few variants of local patches to address these issues and is still open for discussion upstream. His personal preference is to remove the current API entirely and introduce a newer one with narrowed down functionality to swap between readable, writable, and executable memory mappings. So that's read-only, read-write, and read-execute. This would effectively enforce read but not execute. Then some sanitizer support work. Right now, those patches are local in order for upstream eventually with compiler RT. And then there's some stuff on Clang. They've upstreamed patches that enable the ASAN and UBSAN in Clang for NetBSD ARM64. It's not quite complete, and it requires sanitizer support code to be upstreamed in compiler RT. And then you can see a whole list of things they're working on in compiler RT, but the upstream sanitizer common code that's shared between all POSIX platforms, shared between Linux and FreeBSD, code that's shared with just FreeBSD, and code that's specific to NetBSD. So that's all been upstreamed now. They can also build, execute, and pass tests for the sanitizer common code using the check sanitizer script.
Oh.
So a lot of progress in NetBSD on getting all this, the various bits of the LLVM toolset working.
Yeah, we've covered this in a couple of shows already, so it seems like they're making progress full steam ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it says, I've decided not to open new issues within the coming month and focus on upstreaming the remaining LLVM code local that's in NetBSD. The roadmap for the next month is to continue working on the goals of the previous month, including standard call once, as an example of that every delayed bug keeps biting again and again in the future. They're also looking at LLVM version 5, which is planned for release during August, and there's a joint motivation with the upstream maintainer to push compatibility fixes for the LLVM just-in-time compiler in time for that. There is an option to submit a workaround now and introduce refactor for LLVM 6.0.
Excellent.
This ongoing work to update the toolchain is sponsored by the NetBSD Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, and welcomes any donations towards helping them finish this LLVM work.
Yeah, and it's a good example of what the money can make happen or speed up. And yeah, it seems like the NetBSD folks are on a good track of getting the whole LLVM toolchain and Clang and whatever components that has into the tree, and maybe be GPL free, like FreeBSD in similar ways. Okay, that was very nice, an update on NetBSD. Next up is an update on DragonflyBSD, which has reached their 4.8.1 release. So we have the release announcement here in our show notes, and we have a listing of all the changes that were in the release or that's been happening since the last one. So we have updates to dev. So they also listed the names of the committers, but not to scrutinize the names or make that sound weird, we left that out, but the whole show notes will have those. So in dev, we have libc/gmon replace the sbreak with the mmap function call. We have DRM updates. They bring in the Linux compatibility changes from the master. They make flush_work more robust and update to Linux 4.7.10. Very nice. We also have more DRM, fix HR timer and don't reset the timer function or timer pointer to function to null in timeout handler. In sound, they have deleted defFS clone handler for def DSP and def mixer to unload. And VTNet has allocate struct VTNet TX header entries from a queue. So these are smaller fixes, but people who rely on these devices might want to look out for those, and we'll be happy that they have this now. A couple of changes in the kernel. There were some deadlocks fixed in the sound system. They fixed the broken wake-up in crypto code, and they also implemented NX as well as NX in the second edition or separate iteration. And they temporarily set the default MACDEP PMAX NX_enable to 0. Would be nice to know more about this. So if you are do you know any DragonflyBSD developer who might want to talk about this release, what's new, what's exciting, then contact us at feedback@bsdnow.tv, and yeah, make an appointment for an interview. It would be nice to get the word out. In other areas of the system, we have libc updates. They fix a bug in rcommand sh. They also have update in PPP. They fix a minor overflow in the protocol search. OpenSSH got a fix for a broken assignment, and more kernel ACPI changes, like better checks for value arguments or remove no longer needed includes. So all kinds of cleanups, big and small. And there's also a couple of changes for PF. They've got normalization, defragmentation, and packets requiring rehash. So pretty much any system got touched, or any of the subsystem got at least a little bit of changes. So yeah, this looks like a solid release, and people who are on Dragonfly should definitely check it out and update to it.
So our next story is an interesting one. If kind of a bit of history. This is a reproduction of an article that appeared in Dr. Dobbs' journal, which was a software journal, January 1st, 1991.
That's been a while.
It's porting Unix to the 386, a practical approach. And this is written by Bill and Lynn Jolitz, who did 386BSD. So they say the University of California's BSD, or Berkeley Software Distribution, has been the catalyst for much of the innovative work done with the Unix operating system in both the research and commercial sectors. Encompassing over 150 megabytes and growing, that used to be a lot, of cutting-edge operating system networking and application software, BSD is a fully functional and non-proprietary complete operating system software distribution. And they show figure 1 here, where they have the lineage of the various Unixes back in the beginning. In fact, every version of Unix available from every vendor contains at least some Berkeley Unix code, particularly in the areas of file systems, UFS, and network technologies, the network stack. However, unless one can pay the high cost of a site license and equipment access, this software is simply not within the means of most individual programmers and small research groups. And that's where 386BSD comes in. The 386BSD project was established in the summer of 1989 for the specific purpose of porting BSD to the Intel 8386 processor, so that the tools this software offers can be made available to any programmer or research group that has a 386 PC. In coordination with the Computer Systems Research Group, or CSRG, at the University of California at Berkeley, we successfully ported a basic research system to a common AT class machine. And it shows how its 386BSD kind of exists in between 4.3 Tahoe and 4.3 Reno.
Yeah, they have nice...
with the result that approximately 65% of all 32-bit systems could immediately make use of this new definition of Unix. We have been refining and improving this base port ever since.
Yeah, that's still true today.
Yes, a lot of this is... what's interesting is that the 386BSD 2.0, which had never actually come out back in the day, was recently dropped onto GitHub. So it's very interesting if you're into the history of a lot of this code.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
So they say, by providing the base 386BSD port to the CSRG, our hope is to foster a new interest in Berkeley Unix technology and to speed its acceptance and use worldwide. We hope to see those interested in this technology build in both the commercial and non-commercial venues. In this and following articles, we will examine the key aspects of software, strategy, and experience that encompass a project of this magnitude. We intend to explore the process of the 386BSD port while learning to effectively exploit features of the 386 architecture to use with advanced operating systems. Can you imagine what they would have said if they saw what a processor looks like now back then?
Oh, yeah, that they would be impressed, certainly.
Or horrified, one of the two, or both. He says, we also intend to outline some of the trade-offs in implementation goals that must be periodically re-examined. Finally, we will highlight extensions which remain future work, perhaps to be done by some of you who are reading this article today. Turns out, we're still working on the damn thing.
That was kind of a message in a bottle into the future.
Note that we are assuming familiarity with Unix, its concepts and structures, and the basic functions of a 386. So we will not present exhaustive coverage of those basic areas. In this particular installment, they discuss the beginning of our project and the initial framework that guided our efforts, in particular the development of 386BSD specification. Future articles will address specific topics and of interest and the actual non-proprietary code fragments used in 386BSD. And they talk about some of the other areas that will be covered, like the process context switching, executing the first version of it on a PC, kernel interrupts and exception handling, the internet networking code, because, it was still a new thing to have an internet back then.
1991.
ISA device drivers and system support, which is interesting because we just now starting to delete a lot of that stuff. And the 386BSD bootstrap process.
Yep. All complete with charts and diagrams, and also a bunch of code, a little bit of structs showing the Intel 386 process control block or the task switch state. So for people who really want to dig into the history or comparing it to today's implementation, that's certainly a good point to start.
Yep, and I also say most software ports begin with the naive assumption that the Unix kernel is merely a C program with a handful of functions supporting other utility C programs on demand. While in essence this is true, in practice that's a vast oversimplification. Nevertheless, in the tradition of great projects, we acquired a few tools and a few other items before we get down to work. Number one was the design and implementation of the 4.3 BSD Unix operating system.
Classic.
Yep. And then they talk a bit about that and the bits of it they used. A completely blank, inexpensive, standard 386 AT clone machine to minimize the expenses and emphasize commonality. And then using exploratory programs written in Borland Turbo C, we were able to explore the typical AT hardware and figure out what's different about it. I wonder what it looks like when when Andrew Turner did the port to ARM v8. How much of that might be the same as this port back so many years ago.
The challenge of porting, doing the very first porting to a new platform or architecture.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's a great article, and you should definitely take a look at it if you're interested at all in the history of how all this stuff happened so many years ago.
And this brought us to where we are to now, and maybe in another 10 years people read papers that we are currently writing or that a conference has as a history paper.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IXsystems. Head over to IXsystems.com/BSD Now and get in touch with them and tell them what it is you want to do. They're really the right kind of experts in the hardware. I just was reading the Intel's release announcements for a new line of SSDs and NVMe devices they have coming out. And there's a subtle difference between some of the models, like the P3500 and 3600 or whatever. One of them is more optimized for reads, and one is more optimized for writes. So if you want an L2 ARC to do a read cache in ZFS, you want that one. But if you're doing an S-Log to do a write cache, you probably want this other one. But if you don't have the expertise of someone like IX, you might waste a lot of money buying a 1.2 terabyte slog when all you need is a 32 gigabyte slog.
Yeah, that's what the sales people at IXsystems will tell you. What is the right configuration for your needs, and which might be a different configuration for another purpose. But if you can name your exact service, what the service should do in the future, then the IXsystems folks can tell you exactly what they would build you for a system for your specific use case, and they will provide you with the proper solution as with performance.
You
and
tell
price.
them, don't call up and say, I want a machine with 8 disks and 2 SSDs. You tell them, I want a machine that has this much storage and can do at least this many IOPS, and I'm going to use it to run a database, or I'm going to use it to host VMs, because those can change how you want to lay out the system.
Yeah.
If it's just a file server for storing like media files for video editing or something, you want to bias towards more capacity for VMs, you often want to bias towards more IOPS, a more requests per second that you can handle, because there's going to be a lot of random seeking in the VMs. And so it can completely change how you want to set up the hardware. Even if you buy exactly the same hardware, just the way you configure it, whether you do mirror sets in ZFS or a RAID Z2, that can make a big difference in the final performance of it. And so explaining to them what you're trying to do with the machine will ensure they can help you spec out the right hardware for it and get the best value for your money.
Yep.
And, make sure you're not wasting money on a 1.2 terabyte slog device where you're only ever going to use a couple of gigs of it.
Yeah. Because
sure, it'll be super fast, but you probably don't need that big of a one.
Yeah. IXsystems are also the folks that are running or creating the FreeNAS system for your home use or for your office. So you can get the FreeNAS Mini or the Mini XL. So if you just want to store or save your files on ZFS, this is a good starting platform for you.
Yep. What I'm really looking forward to is the next Server Envy blog post for IX, where they play with these ruler form factor drives. So Intel's coming up with these like long, really skinny drives, so you can fit a lot of them in a 1U case or something. And they're shaped like a ruler, apparently.
Yeah, of course.
I'm very interested to see what they'll be able to do with that.
Yeah, we'll certainly cover this in a future show to brag about it. All right, check out IXsystems and tell them we sent you.
Yeah, so we have, next is a really interesting article, I thought. X11, how does the clipboard work?
Yeah, this is one of the functionalities everyone pretty much uses without thinking too much about it. So we thought this might be an explanatory article that might be interesting to people.
Yeah, so say if you've used another operating system before you switch to something that runs X11, then you'll notice that there's more than one clipboard. Sometimes you can use the mouse to select some text, switch to another window, and then hit the middle mouse button to paste it. I do this in my shell all the time. However, you can select text, then hit some hotkey, like Control-C, to switch to another window, hit another hotkey, like Control-V, and paste it. And that's different. And then sometimes you can do both. And usually, like in my shell, it's Control-Shift-C and V, because Control-C will cancel the running program, not, it'll terminate rather than copy.
That's an important distinction to make.
So they talk a little bit about selections as a form of IPC, or inter-process communication. First things first, in X11 land, clipboards are called selections, not clipboards. And yes, there are more than one selection, and they all work independently. In fact, you can use as many selections as you wish. In theory, that is, anyway, when using selections, you must make different clients communicate with each other. This means that these clients have to agree to which selections they will use. We can't just invent our own selection and then expect Firefox to be compatible with it. And then so how are selections identified? There are 3 standard selections in a regular X11 system. There's the primary, which is the middle mouse clipboard, the secondary, which is almost never used, and then there's the clipboard selection, which is the Control-C, Control-V clipboard. So program 1 queries selection owners for content type and conversion. Then program 2 gets clipboard as UTF-8, and then program 3 is trying to own a selection, and then program 4 is content type targets, and all kinds of interesting things happen.
Yeah, and they have program code in C for people to try this out on their own machines, and they can see how it works, the conversion, and how the selectors are working, and they can start getting a feel for how the whole clipboard functions and maybe appreciate it a little bit more next time they're using it.
Yeah, so you see here, we have client A saying, I own selection foo, and then client B is writing selection foo into bar, and then the X server sends that to client A, which is write selection foo to bar. And then later, client A says, here is foo, and sends it to client B, and then client B acknowledges it and says, okay, I got it.
Well, seems easy, but the internal implementation is a little bit more complex. Well, not too complex, but still needs a little bit of brain power to work. And there's also a small section about large amounts of data that you copy to the clipboard, and different clipboard managers, because, well, in everyday work you might have noticed this. You open a window, select some text, hit Control-C, and then close the window. What happens? The selection is lost. Of course it is. The client window that owned the selection is gone. This is different from other operating systems, and even if all operating systems work like that, it would still be annoying. So there's no clean solution to this problem in X11. Instead, the IXsystems suggests the use of clipboard managers. And they work like this. The clipboard manager shall claim ownership of a selection. Once it loses the ownership, it will ask for the current owner for the content, provide the content itself, and reclaim the ownership. And that way, this feels like there are many race conditions involved, but it will also break when a client does not support the target's target. Yet, supporting this target required by IXsystems so that it should work. And they close in summary that the author thinks that it's important to understand that the X server is just a broker. Clients talk to each other via the server and exchanging content. There's no clipboard inside of the server. Data is converted on the fly. You can have as many selections as you like, but not all clients support all of them. And one final thing to note, at first sight, selections in X11 appear to be simple. I fear, though, that they are almost as complicated as time zones. And there's a link to another article here. Even the standard utility Xclip isn't strictly ICCM compliant, and contains the occasional fix me. There are many race conditions and many corner cases. So, if possible, use a library.
Yeah, for the clipboard management rather than using the example code he provided to try to do it yourself. Well, yeah, that was explained a bit more about it than I actually knew originally.
Yeah, I mean, clipboard, for the people who are coming from the command line, they ask, hey, what's that? But the X11 folks know what we're talking about, and many of these desktop environments even try to enhance the clipboard that they have with like multiple clipboards and other extensions. I think there should also be a couple clipboard replacements, separate ones, in the ports collection.
Managers they talked about,
source. Yeah. So, yeah, it would be good to have a comparison of what the features are of the different.
Yeah, if you have a clipboard manager that you're really in love with, tell us about it. Maybe, it'll help other people.
Yeah, so check out the articles, the code, and the diagrams, and next time you use the clipboard, say, that's how it works. Time for our news roundup this week, with the first item being TrueOS documentation, a great way to give back. So it's over at the TrueOS project website currently, which has a gateway problem when I run it, but we have show notes for that. So it begins with the TrueOS project is always looking for community contribution. Documentation changes are a great way for users to not only make a solid contribution to the project, but learn more about it too. Over the last few months, many users have asked for both simple and detailed instructions on making documentation changes. These are now added to the TrueOS handbook in the Contributing to TrueOS section. And if interested in making a small alteration to the TrueOS handbook, there are some instructions for submitting a patch to the GitHub website. These instructions are also applicable to the Lumina and sysadm handbooks. Lumina documentation is in the Lumina docs repository, and sysadm guides are in sysadm-docs. Make a doc change. A GitHub account is required to submit patches to the TrueOS docs, of course. Open a web browser and sign into GitHub or make a new account. When making a new account, be sure to use an often checked email address, as all communication regarding patches and pull requests are sent to this address. Navigate to the TrueOS docs GitHub repository and click on the TrueOS handbook directory to view all the documentation files. Open the .rst file corresponding to the chapter needing an update, and the chapter names are reflected in the title of the RST files. For example, if you install the install RST to fix an error spotted in Handbook Chapter 3, install, this first image shows the TrueOS docs repository and the contents of the TrueOS handbook directory, so it's on the website. You can compare this for your own reference. And then you open the desired chapter file by clicking the entry in the list, and the TrueOS.rst file is an index file and should be ignored. Begin editing the file by clicking on the pencil icon in the upper right corner above the file's text. and the file moves to edit mode, where it is now possible to make changes as the next image shows. So we have the edit window here. Very nice. And now we're basically editing the install RST file as an example with GitHub directly. When making a simple change like a typo or comma fix or whatever, it is recommended to avoid adjusting the specific formatting elements and instead work with or around them. Once satisfied, scroll to the bottom of the page and write a detailed commit summary of the new changes. Yes, detailed commit summary, not just fixed typo or something else. It needs to be a little bit more descriptive so that people know what you're doing and it get a better chance to be accepted. After that, click Propose File Changes, the green button, then create a pull request to submit the changes to the project, and GitHub then does an automated merge check. Click the Create Pull Request again to submit a change to the repository, and in the final step, a developer or project committer reviews the changes, merging them into the project or asking for more changes as necessary. So this is the interaction part between the project and the submitters. And if you want to learn more about TrueOS documentation, you can look at the underlying structure of TrueOS and their documentation, like the Sphinx documentation generator and the restructured text markup. You can browse the advanced documentation changes section of the TrueOS handbook, and this section also contains instructions for forking the repository and configuring a local clone, build testing, updating the translation files, and other useful information. The Sphinx website is also valuable resources. Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so you want a local clone if you're going to use, your own text editor on your computer to do it instead of just, for a typo fix, it makes sense to do it in the GitHub user interface. But if you're going to write paragraphs, you probably want to do it on your own machine.
Yeah, or if you have a bigger change that you don't want to edit live, then you should probably do this offline, and then once you're satisfied, paste this into the GitHub edit window. Yeah, but this is a nice way and a relatively easy way to contribute. And I guess once people have done it a couple of times, they get more used to it, and then we'll submit patches or pull requests even for the project in more in bigger numbers, I guess. But overall, the TrueOS documentation is a very high quality documentation, and there shouldn't be any big mistakes because the TrueOS guys or the folks at IX have a well-versed documentation folk there, and they will make sure that your changes get committed once they are approved.
Yep. This week's episode of BSD Now is also brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and give them a try. You can start for as little as $5 a month. You get a little VM with some RAM and some SSD back storage and a ton of bandwidth, and you can run FreeBSD on it and enjoy lots of interesting things.
Yep, whether it's pre-packaged software that they can provide you so you don't have to install and configure it. It's all very easy, and you just, with the click of a button, run your own droplet, which is their term for a little VM. And you pretty much just have to wait a couple of seconds for the VM to start, and then you can log in with the SSH key you uploaded for it because you want to use SSH to connect to it. And then you can start working with your droplet. Anything you want. If you want to just run a couple of services or have a higher need like highly available block storage, they can also provide that. And it's all SSD based, so you have the speed of the underlying performance medium to run the VMs that you're running or the services within the VM at high speed. They also have a nice monitoring infrastructure, so you can see what your current processes are or what's the bandwidth usage currently. So all kinds of little gimmicks that make the whole website that they provide a nice experience for people to use.
Yep, and they have load balancers, cloud firewalls, team accounts, which are super handy. We use these at Scale Engine like every day. Monitoring and alerts, command line and API access, pre-built open source app images ready to go, 4.9's SLA, nice DNS and reverse DNS management, worldwide availability. You can have your VM in San Francisco, New York, Toronto, London, Amsterdam, Frankfurt,
Yeah.
Singapore, or Bangalore.
So pick a location close to you, and
or
that
one
will
far
give
away.
you.
Depends what you want it for.
Yeah, depending on the use for the virtual machine, the droplet. Yeah, check them out and use our coupon code FreeBSD now to get a little head start and $10 credit to your first droplet.
Yep. So next story.
Oh yeah, next story. That's a nice one. It's Libhijack. It's a revival, and it's over at soldierx.com. And it starts relatively smooth, but it gets more interesting. Yeah. So it starts with, over a decade ago, while standing naked and vulnerable in the comfy of my steaming hot shower, I gathered my thoughts as humans typically attempt to do in the wee hours of the morning. Well, this could be the start of a novel, actually, but it gets more diverse in the next few paragraphs. Thoughts of a post-exploitation exercise raised in my mind, the same thoughts that made sleeping the night before difficult. If only I could inject into Apache some code that would allow me to hook into its parsing engine without requiring persistence. Putting a file-backed entry into /proc/pid/maps would tip off the security team to a compromise. The end goal was to be able to send Apache a special string and have Apache perform a unique action based on the special string. And where are we? Here. Feline Menace's Binary Protection Schemes white paper provides inspiration. Silvio Cesare paved the way into PLT/GOT redirection attacks. Various frag articles selflessly contributed to the direction I was to head. Alas, in the aforementioned shower, an epiphany struck me. I jumped as an awkward stereotypical geek does, like an elaborate Elaine Beans dance rehearsing in the air. If I used ptrace, ELF, and the PLT/GOT to my advantage, I could cause the victim application to allocate anonymous memory mappings arbitrarily. In the newly created memory mapping, I could inject arbitrary code. Since the typical operating system treats debuggers as godlike applications, the memory mapping could be mapped without write access, but as read and execute only, thus enabling the stealth that I sought. The project took a few years to develop in my spare time. I ended up creating several iterations, taking a rough draft into proof-of-concept styled code and rewriting it to be more efficient and effective. I had toyed with FreeBSD on and off for over a decade by this point, but by and large I was still mostly using Linux. FreeBSD gained dtrace and ZFS support, winning me over from the Linux camp. I ported Libhijack to FreeBSD, giving it support for both Linux and FreeBSD simultaneously. In 2013, I started work on helping Oliver Painter with his ASLR implementation, which was originally destined to be upstreamed to FreeBSD. It took a lot of work, and my interest in Libhijack faded. As a natural consequence, I handed Libhijack over to SoldierX, asking the community to take it and enhance it. Over 4 years went by without a single commit. The project was essentially abandoned. My little baby was dead. This past week, I wondered if Libhijack could even compile on FreeBSD anymore. Given that 4 years have passed by and major changes have happened in those 4 years, I thought Libhijack would need a major overhaul just to compile, let alone function. Imagine my surprise when Libhijack needed only a few fix-ups to account for changes in FreeBSD's RTLD. Today I'm announcing the revival of Libhijack. No longer is it dead, but very much alive. In order to develop the project faster, I've decided to remove support for Linux, focusing instead on FreeBSD. I removed hundreds of lines of code over the past few days. Supporting both FreeBSD and Linux meant some code had to be ugly. Now the beautification process has begun. And he's announcing the availability of Libhijack 0.70 today. The ABI and API should be considered unstable as they may change without notice. Note that hardened BSDs fully mitigates Libhijack work. What? Well, is that in the show notes? Well,
yeah,
that was removed. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Switched line a little bit. Next up, The security.bsd.unprivileged proc debug sysctl node prevents ptrace access for applications the debugger itself did not fork plus exec ve for unprivileged non-root users. Privileged users, like the root account, can use ptrace to its fullest extent. HardenBSD's implementation of PAX no exec prevents the creation of memory mappings that are both writable and executable. It also prevents using mprotect to toggle between writable and executable. In Libhijack's case, FreeBSD grants Libhijack the ability to write memory mappings that are not marked writable. Debuggers to this set breakpoints. HardenBSD behaves differently due to PAX no exec. Each memory mapping has a notion of a maximum protection level. When a memory mapping is created, if the write bit is set, then HardenBSD drops the execute bit from the maximum protection layer. When the execute bit is set at a memory mapping creation time, then the write bit is dropped from the maximum protection level. If both the write and execute bits are set, then the execute bit is silently dropped from both the mapping creation request and the maximum protection level. And the last chapter or section in this is the maximum protection level is always obeyed, even for debuggers. Thus we see that PAX no exec is 100% effective in preventing Libhijack from injecting code into a process. There is a screenshot showing PAX no exec preventing a Libhijack from injecting shellcode into a newly created memory mapping. And what's next for Libhijack? There's what we have planned in no particular order. Python bindings, port to ARM64, this requires logic for handling machine-independent code, high priority, finish anonymous shared object injection, and this requires implementing the custom RTLD from within Libhijack, more cleanups of course, and adhere to style. And Libhijack can be found on GitHub at github.com/soldierx/libhijack.
Cool.
Yeah, this might be something for people that are into this security of mappings and all kinds of code injection. So yeah, I heard many people get their ideas in the shower or in the bath. But this is something that should be watched in the future a little bit.
Yep. So next up, we have an interesting article from Michael W. Lucas about contributing to FreeBSD. He says, I've talked to a whole bunch of folks who say that, I'm a junior programmer. I'm looking for a way to help. I have no specific expertise, but I'm willing to learn. He says, today I present such junior programmers with the opportunity. An opportunity for you to learn skills that will be incredibly valuable in your career and will simultaneously expand your career opportunities. For decades, FreeBSD has relied on its users for testing. They expect users to install pre-release versions of the OS and exercise them to identify regressions. That's necessary, but it's nowhere near enough. The FreeBSD testing project is building an automated test suite for the entire operating system. They have a whole mess of work to do. There's only 4 people on the team. For each additional person that contributes, that can make a serious impact to the amount of tests that get written. They have tutorials on how to write tests and even some sample tests. There's a bunch of tests left to write, though. And you have an almost open field. You need tests for everything from LS to Beehive. And yes, LS broke at one point in the last few years. I remember it couldn't print Russian dates correctly for a while, and there was a bunch of other interesting things. So everything needs testing. Learning to write, submit, and commit small tests is valuable expertise for developers who will go on to write bigger tests. And, on your resume, actually having a list of contributions you've actually made and code you've written that people can look at makes a big difference compared to somebody that's just like, well, I took these classes in school.
Yeah, and if it's just test code. Test code is important. People need to test more.
Test code needs to be correct as much as the code that it tests.
Yeah.
They say, what's more, learning to write tests for a system means learning that system. Developing tests will transform you into a FreeBSD expert. Once you've demonstrated your competence, worth, and ability to work within the project, other FreeBSD teams will solicit your help and advice. The project will suck you in, and you will never get away.
Yeah, there are different ways.
So testing is perhaps the most valuable contribution anyone can make to an open source project, other than maybe documentation. And this door is open in the FreeBSD project, and we would welcome as much help as we can get.
Yep. This is a very important issue, and people should not be shy of just creating a bunch of tests. And we have a couple of links from the blog post showing how to write these tests with small tutorials and sample tests. And if you get into it a little bit, then you will find that it's actually quite easy to write tests and submit those. Okay, yeah, this is a nice article by Michael W. Lucas about testing and how to contribute about FreeBSD. Next up, for the gamers among us, we have OpenBSD gaming resources for you. Ooh, this is exciting because we don't hear that many people talking about gaming on the BSDs. So this is an often overlooked topic, I guess.
I'm slightly intrigued by the fact that they have DDB listed as a game. I think it's a debugger.
It could be considered a game, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So this is it looks like a PDF, but it has a different. The web page looks like
it's actually an HTML file.
Ah, it is. Oh, it's converted.
It's just,
okay.
Themed to look like a PDF. It's pretty interesting.
Well, cool. So it starts with, what isn't there to love about playing video games on your favorite operating system? OpenBSD and video games feels like a natural combination to me. My research has software lists, links to free games, not imports, lists of non-free games, and recommendations. And this is actually a long page, so we just covered the table of contents here. So it starts off with, for those people who are new to OpenBSD, a little introduction, what the system is and how to get started with it. General resources like downloads and reviews and information. And then they start off with OpenBSD exclusive games. So they have DDB, like Alan mentioned, and also I guess those are the built-in games that you get with the system if you don't deselect them in the installer or delete them. Then you have the regular ports. Then they talk a little bit more about network clients like MMOs and multi-user dungeons. Then they talk about browser games. Well, these are actually easy because they run on all the computers. It's pretty much independent of the operating system, but there's more. They have game engines listed, so the more known ones like Flare and the ID Tech, the Doom engines, the Quakes of this world. All of these are listed in here. They talk about multiple game engines like ScumVM for playing the old LucasArts games, and not only those, but the other ones that are also running on ScumVM. They also have multiple system emulation like MAME or MES, computer emulation like the Ataris, the Commodores, the ZX Spectrums, game console emulation, the Ataris, the Nintendos, the Segas, the Master Systems, anything you might have played before. Live media emulation.
Mix of, they have things like, Open Arena and the Quakes and so on, and then mixed in here is like SL, the steam locomotive.
Well, it's games. Entertainment. Yeah. And they also provide operating system emulation for those old DOS games that you might still have lying around. And they also have games in other software, and they notably list Emacs there. So this is a pretty good collection of a lot of games, and people will surely find a game in there that they have played before and probably have never finished and trying it again, or something new they haven't tried out before for some welcome distraction between work.
Yeah, lots of different stuff in there.
It's worth checking out. It's highly addictive sometimes. It's driving people away from writing code or doing other contributions. But yeah, for a game here or there, there's nothing against that. Now, after we're all into games, it's time for our Beastie Bits this week before you're all too distracted to follow us any longer. Yes. The first one starts with Dragonfly introduces kcollect. So what's kcollect?
So there's a new facility in Dragonfly called kcollect. It's for kernel. It's not related to the KQ and so on. But basically it holds automatically collected kernel data for about the last day. So it takes a small amount of memory and just keeps a histogram of data for the last day. And you can dump its output into GNU plot and get data about what's been happening about all these kernel counters in the system. This is, note the automatic collection part. Your system will always be able to tell you about any weirdness, assuming that weirdness extends to one of the collected stats that kcollect tracks. So instead of just giving you a counter and you being able maybe to compare it to what that counter was previously, this will actually give you the data for up to a day, so that when something suddenly seems different, you can dump that data and graph it and be like, oh, I can see that at 5 o'clock, all of a sudden, this number went a lot higher.
Well,
instead of just knowing that compared to yesterday, this number is higher. You can actually tell when. It's an interesting idea.
Yep.
You can collect this data manually and store it, but this one is interesting in that it's always being collected, but it's just taking a little bit of memory and you're going to overwrite it in place. And if you end up needing it for something, then it's available.
Yep. People should check this out on Dragonfly. Next up, we have the faces of open source. So this is a link to a website that has a lot of pictures on them of people's faces, of course, because these are the grandfathers, fathers, sometimes sons of Unix, but more like grandfathers, I guess, at this point. So if you ever thought, well, this guy looks like, well, I'm not sure if it's him, or if you have never been to a BSD or a Unix conference and are not sure how people look like, these are a collection of pictures for people who want to check out the
so these
Unix
are people
grandfathers.
That were instrumental to the beginning of Unix, like Ken Thompson. There's a picture of Dennis Ritchie held by his two brothers since he passed
Steve
away.
Steve Bourne is there.
But, Brian Kernighan, who's the K in awk. Doug McIlroy, who invented pipes. Rudd Kennedy, who did some of the original Unix file system before UFS. Peter Weinberger, who's the W in awk. Steve Bourne, who the Bourne shell is named after. Michael Lesk, who did UUCP and Lex. David Korn, who wrote the Korn shell, right? And
with an appropriate T-shirt.
Alfredejo, who's the A in awk.
Yeah, so we have all three together now.
And a bunch of other notable people from Unix. But if you scroll all the way up to the top here, there's actually a BSD category separate from the Unix category.
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden, a lot more faces you recognize.
Yep.
There's Kirk McCusick, Keith Bostick, Eric Allman, who did SendMail and Syslog, Keith Sloker, who contributed a lot to that stuff. And then we got Bob February, who actually got the grants from DARPA to actually fund the CSRG. Jordan Hubbard, who was one of the 3 founders of FreeBSD and went on to work at Apple and integrated into iOS and OS X. And they have some other categories in here too. If you're interested, they have a
bunch more faces from other subsystems or
they
Unix
have Linux, different programming languages, X Windows itself, etc.
Yeah, so check this out if you ever wondered who your...
There's Larry Wall, the creator of Perl. Andy Gutzman, who did PHP. Lots of other people in here.
That's quite a collection. Yep.
Hopefully they'll extend this more and actually have a bit more about the people rather than just, a paragraph or 2. There's a JavaScript guy, Guido von Rossum, who's Python, etc.
Yeah, well worth visiting, definitely.
Yep. John Osterhout, who's TCL. The awk people. C, etc. Very cool.
Yeah, for once, the people that are just listening to the audio might not get much out of this, but they can find the link in the show notes.
Yep.
Okay, next up, the EdgeMesh CEO, Jake Loveless, and joint CTO Brian Cantrell joined together for a fireside chat to discuss distributed caching at scale, Docker, Node.js, Mystery Science Theater 3000, and more. So we have a link to the joint website here with the video.
Yep. And it's indexed by topic. It's almost a 2-hour video, and there's lots of different topics, starting at beginning with the ACM, Barbarians at the Gateways, Unite's Capital Findings, the Container Summit, lots of other stuff in here. Then they get into Mystery Science Theater and IPC and Akamai and Giant, and bandwidth doesn't matter that much. Samsung, WebRTC, K-Park, lots and lots of different topics. So.
Well, this is well worth
There's
watching.
another 2 hours of video for you to watch.
Yeah, over the weekend or some other time.
Mm-hmm. There were a bunch of recent commits by Kirk McCusick about UFS, and I thought a couple of them were interesting, in particular this one that says, since the switch to GPT disk labels from MBR, FSCK for UFS and FFS has been unable to automatically find the alternate superblocks. So if your superblock is damaged, it can't find the additional copies. This check-in places the information needed to find the alternative copies at the end of the area reserved for the boot blocks. So at the beginning of the disk is used to store. So the very first 15 sectors, I think, or 16 of the partition are not used by UFS, so that in an MBR system you could write the boot 1 code into there, or by boot 2 code into there. In GPT, you don't have to do that because the code goes in the FreeBSD-boot partition. So they can use that area to store the list of where to find these superblocks. Mm-hmm. So file systems created with NewFS after this commit will automatically create that recovery information. If you have a file system that was created before and you would like to add this information, you need to run a FSCK in foreground mode. So that's not running -y or -p or anything. So you have to manually run an FSCK without the automatic options. And then at that point, when it starts, it will ask, would you like to save data to find alternative superblocks? And if you say yes, it will write that extra data and it will be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good to see some updates to UFS as well.
It's nice to see the maintenance and ongoing work to keep UFS as a useful file system, especially since for embedded stuff, it is a better option.
And I also like Kirk's commit messages because they are very detailed and explain what the commit is trying to solve. And that's a good example.
I'm sure it has a little bit to do with if he ever wrote bad commit messages back in the day, he's seen them now and, or had to go back 10 or more years later and be like, what is this about again? I don't remember. So write it down while it's fresh in your mind and you'll thank yourself 10 years from now.
Yeah. Don't be in a hurry when writing commit messages.
Yep. Next up, we have a Internet Engineering Task Force draft from Google in particular that wants to force localhost to work the way you expect it to work. Mm-hmm. So currently, if you use localhost in an application, the host file on that system might also point it to somewhere else, or more importantly, most applications will actually try to use a DNS lookup. And the caching name server or the ISP name server or the internet could send you to just about anywhere. And you could end up not connecting to localhost when you think you're connecting to localhost. So their proposal here is that the DNS resolver library, without ever making a connection to the internet, should automatically return the localhost address if you try to resolve localhost without actually making any network connections. And that any DNS server that sees a localhost name lookup should return NX domain right away.
Yeah, without delay and no fuzzing around.
Yes, so it says users are free to use localhost names as they would any other domain names. Users may assume IPv4 or IPv6 addresses, etc. Application software may recognize localhost names as special or may pass them to the name resolution API where they will be treated special. Name resolution APIs and libraries must recognize localhost names as special and must always return an appropriate IP address for IPv4 or IPv6 and negative responses for all other query types. So if you try to look up, an MX record for localhost, it should NX domain. Name resolution APIs must not send queries for localhost names to their configured caching DNS server. And name resolution APIs and libraries must not use a search list to resolve a localhost name. So DNS resolvers have a search list, usually consisting of your domain and any other search path, so that you can type, freefall, and it automatically, when it doesn't find a top-level domain called freefall, it says, hey, there's freefall.freebsd.org if you're on a machine that has this search list or domain set to freebsd.org. You don't want that to happen with localhost, because otherwise you end up looking up localhost.freebsd.org, which is probably not your computer.
Probably not.
Yeah. Caching DNS servers must respond for queries for localhost with NX domain, and authoritative DNS servers must respond for queries for localhost with NX domain. And DNS server operators should be aware that the effective R data for localhost names is defined by protocol specification and cannot be modified by local configuration. And DNS registries and registrars must not grant requests to register localhost names in the normal way to any person or entity. Localhost names are defined by protocol specification and falls outside the set of names available for allocation by registries and registrars. Attempting to allocate a localhost name as if it were a normal DNS domain name will not work as desired for reasons 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully that escalates from a draft into an actual spec.
Yeah, that will be implemented in many operating systems so that people know that localhost is localhost.
Yes, so that your application can rely on not sometimes getting a fishy result for that.
All right,
yes,
last but not least.
A final reminder, we would love to see you in person, so please come on out to VBSDCon, which is September 7th through 9th in Virginia, or EuroBSDCon, which is September 21 through 24 in Paris. So those dates are coming up real soon now, so if you forgot, you need to register, and soon.
Yep, otherwise you will miss all the fun, and not just talking to us, but all the other BSD folks from various projects will be there, and have a good time with them and talk about all things BSD.
For EuroBSDCon, they shamelessly stole the FOSDEM app and made a EuroBSDCon companion app, which will have the schedule in it on your phone. So
excellent.
All the nice features that the FOSDEM app has, but with the EuroBSDCon schedule. So check out that app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hopefully see you there. Say hi, and if you see us in the hallway or somewhere else, introduce yourself. Would be nice to see more of our viewers and listeners. Okay, before we go into our feedback and questions section, we should mention our sponsor for that, which is Tarsnap, the online backup for the truly paranoid. You want to back up your data. You know you want. The way to do that into the cloud is the way that Tarsnap does, which is encrypt your backups locally with the key that only you have, and then send it out into the cloud. And that's what Tarsnap does for you. And if you know how to use Tar and the command line, then you're pretty much set up with Tarsnap and how to use it. But there's also a GUI client now that you can use.
If the command line scares you, grab tarsnap-GUI from your OS's package repo. It's available in most of them now, or you can get it off GitHub, and use the nice graphical interface they've spent the last couple of years building, and it now has its 1.0 release. It makes it super easy to manage and take all your backups.
And Tarsnap is also contributing a couple of its building blocks as open source code, not the whole thing, but a couple of them. The script key derivation function, the keyvalue data store, and the spiped secure pipe daemon. So you can use those components.
Those are available under nice BSD license, and they've also contributed a lot of fixes and so on back to libarchive and FreeBSD itself. And then separately, the client for Tarsnap it's not open source, but the source code is available for you to view so you can audit it. You don't have the right to take it and do whatever you want with it like you do with the actual open source stuff, but you can audit it and make sure it's only doing what you tell it to do on your machine.
Yep. So for all your backup needs, check out Tarsnap and secure your data into the cloud in the only way that's secure, which is keeping the local key as the only person. All right. This week's feedback and questions section starts with Morgan about the news that's been going around. The interwebs BetterFS deprecated. So it's a short section or a short mail to us telling us he knows that it probably won't make it onto the show. Well, it does actually, but I thought you guys would be amused to see this from Red Hat. BetterFS has been deprecated. The BetterFS file system has been in technology preview state since the initial release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6. Red Hat will not be moving BetterFS to a fully supported feature, and it will be removed in a future major release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And the sources is listed, and yeah, this has been going around.
So this is only for Red Hat, not for... It's not, so ButterFS itself is not going away, but Red Hat has decided that it's not reliable enough and they're not going to use it. And in particular, if you're using it on Red Hat, you need to migrate your files off, because when you go to upgrade to Red Hat 8, it will not support ButterFS.
Yep, because in the future they plan to do their own management stack on top of that, as we read a couple of days after that. Let's see how this goes, but Alan and I are still convinced that this is
ZFS is the answer.
Yeah, why would you not use ZFS or anything else than ZFS? But that's just us and many others who have the same regards for the ButterFS folks. Okay, yeah, so this is the information about ButterFS, and we'll watch any more news about this coming in the future months and years maybe. Next up is Ben with UEFI, Jelly, BADM, and more. So he writes, "Hi Benedict, Alan. With the release of FreeBSD 11.1, I decided once again to use boot environments to upgrade my machines." Very good. On one of them, I created a boot environment, mounted it on /mnt, then ran FreeBSD-upgrade-b mnt-r 11.1 release. And after the upgrade had downloaded, I ran the following 3 times: FreeBSD update install-b/mnt. Then unmounted and activated the boot environment and rebooted into it. This worked for all my virtual machines, but then I came to install the upgrade on my laptop. I get this. So there's a message installing updates, and there's a message that in MNT there's a boot directory missing and kernel.old is not there. So a bunch of rather scary looking messages. But
well, in particular, it looks like /mnt is empty. So I'm guessing his mount didn't actually do what he thought it did.
That could be it. Yeah. So he writes, the only difference other than this being real hardware is that I have a full disk encryption using Galley. From his understanding, when Galley encryption is used, the kernel is put into a separate pool, the boot pool. This is then symlink to /boot.
That was true in the past, is less true now. For regular BIOS booting machines, we don't create a boot pool anymore. Because the problem is, if you have a boot pool, boot environments won't work because your kernel is not in your other pool. So having a boot pool means you can't use boot environments. So we're trying to avoid it. Currently, EFI requires it, but that should be fixed in a couple more weeks. So we're working on that, the last bits of integrating that now. But yeah, so if you have a boot pool, boot environments are not going to work. I'm guessing part of the reason for your weird error messages there is /boot is actually a symlink to /bootpool/bootpool or something like that, or /bootpool/boot in that case. And in your /mnt, that won't exist. because you haven't mounted the boot pool. And so, yes, it broke on purpose and stopped you from making an unbootable system.
Yeah, that's a safety measure, actually.
So yeah, boot environments are not going to work with if you have a separate boot pool.
I remember.
Also, to make your life easier, the way I normally do boot environments is I would snapshot and create a new boot environment and call that, before. And it would just be exactly what the system looked like. And then update the running version of the system. Right? So I start with my boot environment default, and that's the one I always use. And before I upgrade, I would create one called, before upgrading to 11.1. And then I would upgrade the regular default one that's running by just running regular FreeBSD update. And then I reboot. And if it doesn't work, I can always boot back into the before 11.1 snapshot.
Yep. Good to know that you're doing it the same way that I do it.
Right. I'm always running default unless something is broken.
Yeah.
Both ways work, but I prefer to do that way because then you don't have to mess around with, temporary mounts and stuff like that.
Yeah, activating and rebooting and yeah. Oh, and don't forget to, if you do the FreeBSD upgrade, if you do the install should at one point tell you to upgrade your ports because there might be some...
So it only does that if you're doing a major version upgrade. If you're switching from 10.3 to 11 or 11.1, you'll need to do that. Going from 11.0 to 11.1 doesn't require you to run package upgrade. You can and should, but your old apps will continue to work as long as you stay in the same major version number.
Yeah, the install step will tell you when it's time to do that. But yeah, other than that, should work.
Sadly, if you have a boot pool, boot environments won't work, and that's why Eric McCorkle and I are trying to finalize the work to get EFI code to support full disk encryption without needing a boot pool. It mostly works now. There's one feature missing, but I think we're going to ship without that. And it's just a matter of cleaning up the last bits. I have to nag Ed to get his bit done too.
Oh, okay. And we'll make sure if it's out, then we'll cover it in a future episode because it's something Alan could talk at length about.
Well, hopefully we can make Eric come on and talk about it, but yeah.
Oh, even better, yeah. Why not bring on the author, yeah. Cool stuff.
Yeah, he's going to be at VBSDCon, so maybe we can trap him there too.
Yeah, and silently hit the record button on the microphone and just talk to him. Okay, yeah. So he closes with, as always, many thanks for the show and continue the great work. Thank you, Ben. And watch this space for future updates on boot environments. And if you're using boot environments, then you're already on a good track. All right, next up is Brad with hostname clarification. So this is for people who are still wondering what they should name their multitudes of machines. So he writes, just wanted to clarify my host naming convention just for your own edification. Physical boxes are named for ships. Different architectures are different races. Like ARM devices are Romulan, Intel are Starfleet, Spark are Klingon, etc. Okay. ZFS pool names are the registry of the ship. Thus, in my forced restarting ZFS article, I have Defiant, which has two pools, the NX74205 and the NCC1764. We have links to Memory Alpha for people who want to read up on those ships.
The ship, yep.
The Yukon has NCC74602, as most Star Trek geek will know by hand. Luna is NX80101. And it's probably a bit excessive, but he has been using and refining this naming convention for almost 20 years, and B, the pool names being the registry number seemed a bit more elegant given the naming convention than using Tank 1 and Tank everywhere. Oh, and VMs are named for Star Trek characters.
Nice. I like that. Thanks for writing in and explaining that one. I noticed the connections, but I didn't quite see the whole pattern.
Yeah, this is, and if you keep with that pattern, then you pretty much have enough machines to name and pools to also name for a number of years, I guess, so you won't run out of names. Cool. Next up is Emrod about BSD laptop. He writes, I'm the owner of a new BSD laptop. I'm quite satisfied, but there's 3 things I'm a bit... quick note. I'm a Windows convert, not an X-Linux user. What is the extent of support for NTFS? Is Wine on BSD the same as Wine on Linux, not in terms of source, but as compatibility layer? And how do I get more involved coming from an applications development standpoint on Windows? Thank you guys for the great show. So support for NTFS is read-only. There was an experimental module that had
there was read-only NTFS built into the base system, but that was removed. But with the Fuse module, if you install the NTFS-3G package, you'll have read-write NTFS, and it works pretty well. It's works perfectly fine for the Windows reading and writing files from the Windows partition on my laptop, or for USB sticks and that. Wine is pretty much the same. It's the same software that you'd run on Linux, and it works pretty well. If you go over to the TrueOS blog, they have some tutorials on actually like running Windows Steam under Wine to play games on PCBSD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a couple of well-supported games.
It works quite well, and they have it working to the point where you can play games with it. So, that means most of your regular applications are gonna work just as well as they did on Linux.
Mm-hmm. And what about the application development standpoint thing? So if you're coming from an application development, you might want to look at cross-platform GUI toolkits or frameworks like Qt maybe. That could certainly help you since you've been developing on Windows.
Right, so I guess the question is, are you wanting to develop apps for BSD? Because Qt would be the easiest way to do something like that.
If you want to
work on Wine, I guess they have a website where they talk about how you can contribute there. Although it depends on how deep you were into the Windows Application API, whether you'd be interested in that. But yes, definitely, the TrueOS project has a lot of basic Qt apps that they've written that are in their repo. They might be a good place to start as far as some examples to look at of just what a basic graphical application on a BSD looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Lumina Wi-Fi manager and the file manager and or the PDF viewer and a bunch of the different tools that they've made over there at the Lumina project in their repo. If you checked earlier in the episode where we showed how to contribute to their docs, and basically beside the docs are the source code for the applications, and you could look at a lot of the little smaller utilities in Lumina and get a basic example of what an application would look like.
Yep. Or drop into the ports channel. There's always people looking for maintainers for ports or writing new ports. So that's a way of contributing and doing some application-centric work. Okay. We hope that answers your question. And last but not least is Jeremy with contributing to BSDs. He writes, "Hey guys, I was listening to episode 201 this morning on my way into work and was intrigued by the section that talked about getting pulled into contributing to one of the BSDs and getting over imposter syndrome. I'm definitely interested in working..."
The post by Peter Hessler.
Mm-hmm. Yep, remember that one. He's definitely interested in working on FreeBSD, but he's not really sure where to start or even what to start on, since he had... so he tend to have an interest in more topics than he has time to pursue. I'm also fully aware of the effects of imposter syndrome, since most of my programming skills have been self-taught through this laborious process of banging my head against the desk while debugging my code. Any advice or pointers would be greatly appreciated. As an aside, I live in Southwest Michigan in the States. Keep up the good work with the show. And P.S., I'm now a full-time FreeBSD user in part due to this show. Well, great. That's nice to see. I had been wanting to use FreeBSD as my daily driver, but had been going back and forth between Debian and FreeBSD. BSD Now definitely helped me stay motivated to work through the process of learning FreeBSD. Wow, this is great.
Yeah, so he's in Southeast Michigan. So he's actually, there's a Southeast Michigan BSD users group, Semibug, run by Michael Lucas. So you definitely might want to check that out since it's in your area. Yeah. And it can help you get in touch with people and do stuff. As far as the other stuff you said, I can identify with all of that. I had no C programming experience until I wanted to use libucl in a shell script, and so I write a really small C wrapper around it and started playing with it a bit. And then I got interested in making boot environments work with the Geli disk encryption, so I started hacking on the bootloader, and it was just a huge amount of time banging my head against the desk debugging the code until it worked. So advice and pointers is they definitely don't give up, and that's how everybody learns, basically. And being self-taught that way is perfectly fine. That's how I did it. And I definitely identify with having more interests than I have time. The number of things I would like to work on in BSD is huge, and I have time for like 2 of them, and I've already agreed to do 5 of them.
More like 6.
Yeah. I would try to pick an area to start on. You don't have to stick with it. You can change your mind, but try to pick one particular thing to focus on. If you have an idea of what it is you would like to work on, you can write us in again, and we can point you a little more solidly in that particular direction. But in general, all the code's there, and you can take it and hack on it and make a small improvement. One thing I might suggest is start by trying to scratch your own itch. If there's something in particular, or a feature that's missing, or something that doesn't work, or whatever, that would make your life easier, adding an extra feature, do that first, because it's easier to keep motivated when it's something that you're going to use when it's done. Which was a very interesting concept of the whole the Geli boot environment stuff. I don't use the disk encryption on my laptop, so my motivation for it was mostly to make it work for other people, not for myself. And it was an interesting exercise in staying motivated to do this when it was not something I particularly wanted.
Yeah. And definitely don't be afraid to ask questions, like on IRC or in forums. Maybe you can find a mentor if you're more into having a longer-term connection to the project. Also check out the bug tracker, because those already have a couple of patches in them. See if those still work, or clean them up a little bit, or provide patches in the first place to small things that people have asked.
Like Michael Lucas said earlier in the show, and he happens to be the guy organizing the Southeast Michigan BSD user group, you can start with testing, right? If you want to look at the FreeBSD testing team is currently only 4 people and probably needs to be like 40 people. So they would love to have any help. And the range of work starts very small things all the way up to very big things. So you can start small and then scale up as you have time and feel comfortable and so on. So yeah, if you don't know where to start, testing. Start with writing tests. Exercise other programs, and it'll teach you a lot, because you'll be reading the source code for these other programs a bit to try to figure out where to test and so on. And you'll be writing code for these new tests, so you'll get experience with both things and learn a lot about BSD in the process.
Yep. Also help other people if they have questions that you might have an answer for. And keep learning. That's the way to get into the more interesting stuff that will definitely keep you occupied.
All right. That's a whole show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, once again, we went through the whole show and are now reaching the end. Don't forget to send us feedback, comments, show ideas, topics at feedback@bsdnow.tv. Anything that's on your mind, something that you found, a blog post you've written or found. We pretty much get anything from the BSD internet out there into the show.
We would love it if you'd volunteer to be interviewed. Failing that, if you want to volunteer someone else.
It's good with us.
If there's somebody who you could cajole and arm twist to coming onto the show, that'd be great.
Yeah. Otherwise, see you next week, and keep using BSD.